So in the last video I left off and I actually started to record the next video, which is actually going to be this one, and unfortunately I suffered a pretty serious crash. Unreal just totally crashed on me, and yeah, I lost a bunch of work from the previous tutorial. So I tried to catch up and recreate everything that I did. So if these numbers over here in the depth of field settings look different from the last video, that's why. So anyway, basically the idea was, in the previous video what we did was we were doing some look dev here with the depth of field and trying to get a look for our depth of field effect at the beginning of the animation and then toward the end. So now we're going to see how we can actually animate these parameters over here. So before I do anything else, first thing I want to do is I want to identify what parameters I want to animate. So if I go to the Matinee and I look at camera 3, which is the current camera I'm working on, you'll notice that I only have two tracks that I can animate. I have a movement track and I have a field of vision angle track. Well, if we look over here, we can see what we have here is a focal distance parameter and a focal region parameter, and those do not exist in the Matinee. So how in the world are we going to animate those parameters if they don't exist? Well, we have to add them in, and this is the way that it works. I'll select the camera 3 and I'll right click, and it might be a little bit hard to see. This might go off the screen a little bit, so let me do this. I'm going to tear this menu off, and I'm just going to come down here to camera 3, right click. Okay, now it's all inside of the recording area. Okay, so when we right click on camera 3 inside of the track view in Matinee, we'll get this contextual menu, or this right click menu, and we've got a whole bunch of different options. So we have the ability to add new tracks, and we do that here with these menu items. So we have like add new event track, add new animation track, etc., etc. What we're looking for is focal distance and focal region. But if we look over here, they don't exist. You can look up and down this entire list. You're not going to find focal distance or focal region. The reason for that is because this list allows you to add a type of track, not a specific track. So what do I mean by that? The type of track would be, let's say, a car or motorcycle, right? So this is showing you car, boat, motorcycle, train, plane, etc., etc. Different vehicles. This over here is a specific parameter that belongs to one of those types. So let's say a car's tire, or a motorcycle's chain, or a boat's rudder, things like that. I'm just trying to put it use an analogy that makes a lot of sense. So what we have to do is first identify the type of parameter that we want to animate. Okay? So if you're not familiar, Unreal has different data types like bools or booleans, things like floats, vectors, all kinds of stuff like that. If we look over here in this list, we have float. For example, float material parameter track. We've also got movement track. We've also got some vector property tracks, a whole bunch of different things. And what we're looking for are float tracks. And the reason for that is, in case you don't know, a float is a data type that is a number with a decimal point. So something like 57.26 would be a float. Something like 187.01 would be a float. Why? Because they have a point with a number, a decimal. So you can see that these two parameters have decimals. That means they're both floats. So if we go over here, we want to add a new float parameter. So if we look through here, we'll see that we have these three. We have float material parameter. We're not dealing with materials, so that's probably not it. Float particle parameter. We're not dealing with particle effects here, so that's definitely not it. And then finally we have float property track. Well, this is a property right here, the focal distance and the focal region, and they're both floats, so that's probably it. So we'll click on that, and then we'll get this little window. And right now what Unreal is doing is it's giving us a list, and if we click on that, whoa, you get a whole bunch of options here. Basically Unreal is going, okay, you want to pick up a float property from this camera. when I look at the camera, there are a ton of float properties. If we look at this, there's all these float properties. Ambient occlusion's got properties, motion blur, depth of field. We've got lots of properties. If we look at this, we have properties for bloom, we have properties for exposure, lens flares, all kinds of stuff. What we're looking for is depth of field. So if we scroll down, we're going to see all of the depth of field stuff down here. Okay, so we've got lots of stuff. The scale, far blur size, near blur size. We're looking for the focal distance. So, here it is. Depth of field, focal distance. So we'll click on that and then hit OK. And let me actually dock this over here. And there it is. There's our focal distance. Now we have a focal distance track, and we have access to the focal distance of camera 03, and we can start animating it. But we also need, if we go back, we'll go to add new float property track. Let's go back to the depth of field section. Now we've got the focal distance. What we also need is the focal region. So I'm going to click on that, hit OK, and now we have focal region. So now we can animate that stuff. So if I come over here, these settings look pretty good for, well, maybe not that good. I want to blur this out, the background a little bit more. So let me take this focal region, set it really low. Maybe something like 10's a pretty small number. Maybe about, I'll say 50. That's a pretty small number, but I'll say 50. And that's pretty much it. So if these parameters set at 1 and 50, what I'm going to do is go back to Matinee. I'm going to select both of these guys with control click, and I'm going to hit the enter key on the keyboard. And it's going to tell me only one track can be selected at a time when I drop keyframes, so that's fine. I'll hit enter on focal distance and enter on the focal region. So if I right click on one of these, like let's say the focal distance, and I go to set value, it's set to 1, which is correct. If I right click on this one and go to set value, it's set to 50. Because if you look here, it's set to 1 and 50, which is exactly what I wanted. So here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to move this in the timeline, my time slider. Let's say this animation takes about, I'm going to say 5 seconds. And then I'm going to try it out. So at 5 seconds, let's create a new keyframe for the focal distance and focal region. And let's jump back in here. And what's the parameters that we want to set for this? Let's try about 1,000 with a focal region of 250. That's not good enough. Let's try 500. That's not too bad. 400 looks pretty good. I'm starting to get some of those rocks to show up. Okay, that's cool. I think I'm going to set it to about a focal distance of 250 and a focal region of 1,000. So 250 and 1,000 looks pretty good. So let me jump back in here. And this one's already set at 250. And this one should be 1,000. And it's not. So let me set that to 1,000. And the reason that this one got set, the focal distance, is because I had the track selected and I had my time slider at 5 seconds. So whenever I made changes here, they were adjusted over here. And the reason this one didn't get adjusted is because this is the focal distance was selected, not focal region. Okay? But anyway, it doesn't matter. I've already gone ahead and manually set this stuff. So we should be good to go. Let me just check the values on these guys. That's 50. That's 1. Okay, we should be good to go. So let me tear this off. And what we'll do is we'll just scroll through here, and there we go. We could see the depth of field kicking in. Pretty cool. Nice. and let's loop it. Okay, it's a little bit slow. I don't know about making it, 5 seconds. That might be a little bit too much. So what I might end up doing instead, might make it a little bit shorter than that. I'm going to take these keyframes, and you can select multiple keyframes. If you hold down Control and Alt and then left click and drag, you can create a marquee selection box, so you could select multiple keyframes at a time. Then I hold down the Control key and just drag these guys over. So at 2 seconds, that means that this animation is going to occur in 3 seconds. It's going to be about 3 seconds long if we go from the first frame. So let me go ahead and tear this off again. And the only reason I have to tear this off and play it over and over again is just because I'm recording this tutorial and I need everything to fit in kind of a small recording area. So let me loop that. Cool. Alright, that's fine. Not the coolest camera animation, but it serves its purpose of teaching you how to set this stuff up and all that. So, cool. Alright, so now that that's done, I'm pretty happy with the 3 cameras. That's enough to really kind of give you something to wrap your brain around for now. I'm going to go ahead and end this video, and in the next one I'm going to go ahead and start to see how I can start sequencing these cameras together to make one long continuous cinematic.